We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're very excited for our speaker tonight, who I'm going to introduce. I am Tara Gagne. I'm the new Chief of Schools here in the Hudson School District, part of our Mental Health Advisory Committee, helping facilitate that. So I want to recognize those of you who are on our Mental Health Advisory Committee tonight who helped put this together and organize. So if you guys could just give a bit wave and thank you. If you guys could give a round of applause to those who've helped put this together tonight. So very excited for our speaker. I'm going to introduce Dr. John Klem. Has an extensive career in mental health counseling with over 30 years of experience working in residential treatment centers and outpatient therapy clinics. John is currently the program director of the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. For the past 5 years, John has trained educators throughout Wisconsin on the impact of adverse childhood experiences and trauma on the school environment and learning. He will be sharing some of his knowledge on these topics with us today. If you guys can welcome Dr. John Klem.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. Oh, looks good. Ooh, loud. So I put this together. So it's interesting. I've been a therapist for a long time. So I started in the field of counseling in 1992. So long time. It's the only thing I've ever done in my life is work with people in a counseling context. And they asked me to do a parent night. Oh, I don't know. Kristen asked me to do it a couple months ago. And so I was like, well, what do I talk about? Like, how do I make this work? So I've been brainstorming, and this morning I had like this burst. And so I kind of redid my entire thing a little bit this morning. So hopefully I can explain to you kind of two basic things: what mental health is, and go kind of deeper into it. Everyone kind of knows about mental health now, but I'm going to try to explain it at a little bit more deeper level, kind of give you an understanding of what mental health really is. If you pull up the hood, you hear about the words anxiety and depression and things like that, bipolar or oppositional, those kind of terminologies, ADHD, trauma, those are thrown around a lot. And I'm going to try to explain to you a little bit about what's underneath those words. And then I'm going to kind of spend the second half talking about what can you do as parents. How can you intervene? Where is intervention useful? I kind of tried to keep it relatively brief as I can, to still make it useful, and then open it up to some questions. I have a PowerPoint. I promise you I will not read it to you. In fact, I probably won't fully stick to it, because my brain sometimes takes me to interesting places. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about, go this way, the amount of mental health that's going on. And when we go through some of these statistics, I don't know if mental health is worse than it's ever been. I think to some degree we have far less stigma, so I think more people are willing to talk about it than ever before. But my career, as I've been doing this a long time, I've seen a lot of mental health in my career. I've seen a lot of struggling teenagers in my career, and I always felt like it was pretty common. I just felt like people didn't really want to talk about it, and people didn't want to admit it. And I think that we are starting to see a shift in our society, that the stigma to talk about is lifted. And in some cases, I'll talk maybe this later, I do think that some teenagers now, middle school kids, are starting to self-identify with mental health labels. I'm starting to see people going, oh, I want that, I'll be depressed, or I'll be anxious. So I'm actually seeing a rise of kids using mental health labels to create a sense of a purpose or identity. It's an interesting trend that I'm seeing in our culture. That's not to say that that they feel good about themselves. I'm not saying that they're doing this, that's always inappropriate that they're doing this, but I am seeing that trend. One of the things we do as part of the master's program for mental health counseling at Stout is we actually I have 10 of my students that work full-time in school districts, or 3 days a week in school districts, who do nothing but counseling all day long in school districts. So I literally talk about counseling in the schools half of my week. So I'm pretty familiar with what's going on in the schools and with this generation of students that's kind of moving through the world right now. The statistics for this is kind of what I was just talking about. And the thing that I think I want you to understand as we kind of go through mental health is I really want you to understand that mental health is not like getting sick. You know, if you get exposed to someone who has the cold, you're going to get sick. That's how it works. You know, and it happens pretty rapidly. You know, you get the virus in your body then the virus starts attacking your body, you get sick pretty quickly. Within a week, you know you're not well. That's not how mental health works at all. Mental health works exactly the opposite of that way. Mental health grows inside people. Mental health issues grow inside people. And it can take, in many cases, it takes years before someone truly develops a mental health disorder. So please know, if a kid says, hey, I'm depressed, please understand that that point where they finally identify as themselves as really sad and really depressed and really hopeless and really worthless, it's taken a long time for that to emerge. People, I don't like, to some degree, the way we do diagnosis of mental health because it implies you just got this on a Tuesday. And that's not how it works at all. Anxiety disorders where you live with a lot of fear and you hide and you avoid a lot, those are built over time, okay? And so I think the stigma is decreasing, and I think therefore kids are more often self-identifying it, but I think it's really important to understand that people don't wake up and become diagnosable. It has been a journey toward that place. No, this way. So I was asked to put some of the statistics about Hudson School District in general up here, like the percentage of people from various populations that identify as having mental health issues. And you'll notice some of those are pretty high. I think you'll see kids with food insecurities, there's 76% of them identify as having mental health issues. But all of the numbers are pretty high. Basically, kids are far more willing to say, yes, I feel unwell inside. I feel very anxious. I feel very depressed. And I'm going to repeat this slide later on because as we get deeper into the presentation, I want to go back to this because I'm going to try to make more sense of these numbers. Some other, and you'll notice again, you're looking at half the kids in the schools right now are saying they have anxiety issues. 30% are saying they're sad or hopeless depression. You have self-harm there where kids are cutting on themselves or burning themselves, 1 out of 5. That's a really high. Now, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think one of the reasons we're seeing an increase in self-harm is because everybody knows about it. One of the things that I'm seeing is it's not only that kids are identifying it more, the stigma has decreased, but it's everywhere. When you're a kid now, all you have to do is get one of these suckers and you can find out about every mental health disorder there is on the planet. When many of you were kids, how easy was it to find out about what was going on in the next town over? How easy was it to find out what everybody was doing in New York City or LA? Those things didn't exist. You just did what everyone around you did. So a lot of the mental health that we saw in the 50s and 60s, substance abuse or depression, and a lot of times it was kept in a very narrow part of the world. But now with the rise of the information age, a kid feels really unwell inside, they don't know what to deal with it, it's really easy. You Google, I'm unwell inside, what should I do? And you'll find all sorts of websites that'll tell you, go cut on yourself. So we do have this rise of some new behaviors that I didn't see. When I was a therapist in the early 90s, I didn't see a lot of self-harm. I remember the first time a kid ever cut on herself, it was 1995, and she scratched on herself with a little safety pin, and I remember thinking, oh, you shouldn't do that. Like, it never even dawned on me as like a huge issue. Our friends were freaking out, but I, as a therapist, was like, that's kind of new to me. And now self-harm is something I talk about every day of my life. So you can see the basic statistics. Bottom line is there's a lot of kids self-identifying as having mental health issues. It's very, very common right now. So some basic things about development. First of all, as I said earlier, mental health is not something that just arrives inside the body. Mental health is built. I mean, it is shaped inside you through time. But mental health is a combination of two things. It's a combination of your genetic code, your biology, and the environment around you. all mental health disorders, and you've heard probably all the words, autism or Asperger's or post-traumatic stress disorder, separation anxiety disorder, agoraphobia, major depressive disorder, bipolar 1, bipolar 2. I can list them all. I teach the class on diagnosis, so I'm pretty familiar with almost all the mental health disorders. There's like 500 of them. Actually, there's like 267, I think. 267. I'm pretty familiar with most of them, and they're all a combination of genetics and the environment. Some are more genetic, some are more environmental, okay? Some are greatly influenced by how a child is parented in the environment around them, and some of them are far more genetic. The ones that are more genetic are, many of us would probably say, sure, autism is genetic. Autism is not created by environmental forces. Actually, in the 50s, they used to blame the mother for autism. In the 1950s, if a kid had autism, the doctor would say to the mom, the reason your child is this way is because you were a bad mom. That was how it was done in the 50s. They blamed the parent for the kid being autistic. We now know that's not true at all. That's absolute crap. You are born with the brain structure that leads you to be very rigid and to have to struggle with social relationships. Autism is something you're born with. Now, the environment can influence it greatly. Early intervention with autism can soften the impact of the autistic. It can change the way the brain's wired so they become more capable of flexibility in dealing with people. So the environment can influence the severity of the autism, but there is going to be neurological structures in their brain that are going to influence them in a specific way throughout their life. So autism is one of those more genetic mental health issues, while other disorders, for example, anxiety and depression, are typically much more environmental. Much more environmental. Oppositional defiant disorder. ADHD is one of those ones that's right there in the middle. I really struggle with ADHD, and we might get into that a little bit later, but anxiety disorders, many times, they're shaped by the environment as well as depression. So it's the first thing you have to understand about mental health is that, first of all, it takes time for it develops, and that the genetics do play a role, but the way the environment the child grows up in greatly influences whether or not they end up really unwell mentally in life. And in some cases, it's pretty obvious. If you treat a child really poorly, you don't feed them, you don't love them, you don't nurture them, you don't take care of them at any level, they're going to end up with mental health issues. But our culture is changing, and I think there are some kids that are ending up anxious and depressed that may not have been 30 or 40 years ago because of the way our society is changing somewhat. Mental health issues. So if you take, I wish I would have brought my book, the Diagnostic Manual for DSM, it's called. I wish I would have brought my big book. It's 1,000 pages. I don't really like the book because realistically, when I really look at almost all the mental health issues out there, they're disorders of emotionality. They're disorders of emotionality. That's what mental health is in many, many cases. Not all. Autism is not a disorder of emotionality. Schizophrenia is not a disorder of emotionality. But anxiety, depression, separation anxiety, the eating disorders, a lot of mental health disorders are disorders of emotion. That's what they are. There is the person has emotions in their body, feelings in their body that they don't know what to do with, and because of those emotions, they think a certain way, and then they engage in a certain way because of it. The other thing I tell all of my students is that we all go through periods of mental unwellness. All of you have been really anxious before. All of you have been scared to death before. That's a normal human trait. It usually waxes and wanes, though. If you're starting a new job, you're going to spend 6 months stressed out. You could almost say you have an anxiety disorder. That's how it works. If someone that you really care for leaves you or passes away, you may get really, really sad. And you may be depressed for 4 to 6 months. That's normal. That's called humanness. But what happens for some people is it doesn't resolve. And it stays in their body much longer than the average person. And because of the length it's living inside you and influencing how you think and what you do, then it starts moving into the land of diagnosable mental condition, mental disorder. Usually what helps people get better in life? Well, usually what helps people get better in life is support, connection. That's usually the thing that helps a person get well. But if a person feels like there's no one, even if people are there for you, but if you don't feel like anybody's there for you, it can very much increase how you end up feeling about yourself, if that makes sense. Wrong way. Having a hard time doing this. Okay, so I'm going to now explain to you a little bit about people, all people. When you look at people, there are three distinct parts of us. It's a lot more complicated than this, but in general, this is a pretty helpful little framework. It's called it comes from a theory called cognitive behavioral therapy. But basically, when I talk or teach people about themselves, we are three basic components. We think thoughts, we feel things, and we do things. We think, we feel, we do. And those are the three pegs of mental health. Those are the three pegs of humanness. Okay. Ironically, when we're born into this world, we don't actually have the ability to think. So when we enter this world, we have only one basic survival mechanism. That's our emotions. We are born in this world. Our emotions are what helps us survive. When we're angry, we get fussy and we get mad at mom. Or if we're sad, we cry. We do things based on our feelings. So our feelings create our behavior, which then makes mom or dad or the caregiver what? Care for us, if that makes sense to you. So emotions are the basic, most important part of the human species. Okay? They are the thing that keeps our species alive. If you look at all the animals in the world, mammals, which we are, what keeps all the animals of the world alive? What keeps the rabbit alive in the yard when it's during the summer? The rabbit's scared to death all the time. Look at any rabbit. They're always like, oh my God. Because a bird can take it out. So what is it doing? It's always in a fear response, sensing danger, ready to bolt. We're also like that. We also have emotions like that. But we don't stop at infancy. Our brain develops. We have an amazing brain. It develops amazing powers of thinking that can greatly guide what we do, and we can create amazing things because of this. But we start out with a brain that's pretty much like a rabbit, a dog. Very simple, very emotional, very reactive. But over time, let's go. But the other piece I want to talk about with emotions is that there are only 6 of them. There are only 6 emotions. That's it. We in the humans have created 1 million emotional words. But there are 6 basic states of emotionality. And what you'll notice is these 6 basic states of emotionality line up really well with mental health disorders. Most mental health disorders that you see, the most common ones, are disorders of, some of these emotional words. Okay, there's not a... Happy usually doesn't cause mental health issues, but happy can be elicited through chemicals, so substances trigger happy. There's a reason people get addicted to substances, because they influence how we feel happy. So these emotions, in some ways, that all of us have, all of you have, to some degree, are the building blocks of humanness, and they also, when these aren't handled well, when we don't to some degree, learn how to deal with these emotions, we develop mental health issues. Now, there's some words up there, you may go, well, where's anxiety? Well, anxiety would be what? Which one of those words is anxiety? Fear. Where's rage? Anger. Where would be lonely? Sad. So we have 1 million words. Frustrated would be, what do you think? Could be disgust, could be anger. Stress. Stress can actually be more than one. Stress is not a good word. If I'm doing therapy with someone and someone says they're stressed, I'm going to really try to take that word apart, because stress could be what? You could be stressed what? Stressed and feel annoyed, angry. Ever been stressed, angry? And you also can be stressed, scared. And could you also be sad while you're stressed, scared? Yes. So the emotions don't come alone. Sometimes they come in pairs. Like the other day, I was saying goodbye to someone, and I was happy and sad simultaneously. They don't come alone. But the bottom line is these are states of being that live inside us, and I think all of you, if you just spend 5 minutes thinking about it, can really identify times in your life where you have felt these feelings and they've been really uncomfortable or they've been manageable. And these are part of all humans, and these form, in some ways, the building blocks of, when not dealt with well, of mental health issues. So all people have these emotions, and all people react out of these emotions. In fact, this is an interesting thing about our brain. When a stimuli comes at your senses, through your eyes or nose or smell, when you touch, the first part of the brain that activates is the emotional center. You feel before you think. You feel before you think. When I throw something at you, you don't have time to go, oh, there's a ball coming at my head. You just move. Why? Because your emotional centers, your neurology says, we got to dodge and weave quickly. Emotions are impulsive and quick and outside of our control. Remember, they're survival mechanisms. When a bear pops out of the woods, you shouldn't want to pet it. Okay? You should just run. And that's what emotions make you do. Emotions are not smart. In some ways, they're good enough to keep us alive, but they're not really good enough to help us create cell phones. They're survival pieces. They also help us connect. You ever seen the movie Inside Out? You guys ever seen that movie? It's a cartoon. It's a little slow in the middle. But actually, it's really, really accurate to what emotions are for. If you ever want to watch a good movie about emotions, they actually really do a nice job of explaining the usefulness of emotions and where they become problematic. You know, if a child is parented reasonably well, to some degree, they develop a normal level of emotionality. Meaning, if you really mistreat a child when they're young, you don't nurture them, you don't hold them, you don't respond to their needs, what actually happens, what most people realize, is they become more emotional creatures. See, when you're developing and you're mistreated, your brain goes, oh, these emotions aren't working. We need to build more emotions. So when you mistreat a child, trauma, adverse childhood experiences, you actually make the child more emotional, which is problematic because the more emotions you have, the more impulsive behavior that's going to come out of it, if that makes sense. So if you nurture a child well, what you do is you actually, the emotional centers of the brain stay about the same, and then the frontal part of the brain, where the ability to think, develops normally. If you abuse a child or neglect a child in the first 1,000 days of life, it's very hard for them to ever fully recover from that, because their brain is developing to survive, and it's not developing to think. It's very, very important that first 1,000 days to treat children really, to basically show up and do the best you can. No parent is perfect. Sometimes the child's crying, and no matter what you do, it just doesn't work. That's okay. But if you continuously neglect or abuse a child, it does damage, significant damage. And what it does is it makes them very, very emotional. And then if they have bigger feelings in their body, as I said, that's a building block for mental health issues. It increases the odds of mental health issues later. Okay, at some point, though, all kids grow up and all people develop the ability to think. We all develop. So I actually talk a lot about this. Emotions are in the back of the brain, thinking's in the front of your brain. That's just how it works. This is the prefrontal cortex. If you get a head injury, don't get it right here. It's a bad place for a head injury because this is where thinking lives. This is where humanness lives. This is where the ability to do school lives. This is the ability that got you here, drives a car. Most things, human-wise, frontal back of the brain is where emotions live, survival. Survival versus humanness. Okay, so at some point, kids grow up. All of you grew up. All of you learn the ability to think. And all of you started trying to make sense of the world, add language, and think about, why is the world happening the way? Who am I? What am I? Who are these people around me? You basically start trying to figure out life. Okay? And so that's how it works for everybody. You go through these early childhood experiences. If your parents do a decent job, you kind of make some peace with your emotions. Your emotions get you what your needs met. And then as you get older, you start thinking and you start trying to make sense of the world. And you start learning and you start curious, running around the house and all the things you do just to try to figure out the world. You're reasonably safe, and so you're now exploring. And you basically start the ability to think. And the safer you are, the more nurtured you are, the better your frontal lobe's going to develop, and the better you're going to be able to do school and life and all those other things. But the thing is no parent is perfect. No such thing. Every parent mishandles their kid. And to be honest with you, your job as a parent also is to tell kids, no, don't do that. And so every kid, as they're trying to explore and become a human being, we as parents, I have 2 kids myself, we have to shape them and say, no, you can do this, and no, you can't do that. And then a lot of times when you say no to the kid the first time when they're young and you can't do that, what do? They do it anyway. So then you have to yell at them and you have to say, hey, you can't do that. That's not how we're going to do it. And so you have to make them feel bad. To some degree you do. You have to set limits and you have to set boundaries. And every kid, that's just how we shape human beings. Kids have these emotions, they have these newfound thoughts, and they're exploring the world, and our job as parents is to kind of guide them and teach them about the world. And that's how the kid then starts making sense of you, the world around them, and themselves. And if you treat your kid with reasonable levels of respect, you set healthy boundaries, but you love them or connect with them at a reasonably good level, the kid feels reasonably good about themselves, learns the rules of the world. But everybody, because of the way parents have to engage, everybody develops a little bit of a dark side. Everybody develops a part of themselves that goes, I'm not good enough. People don't like me. If I do this, I'm not a good person. I don't know if I have as much worth if I do these things. We all develop kind of this balance of thoughts about ourselves. Basically, as you tell a kid no, and then the kid breaks the rules and you punish them to some degree, the kid learns, if I do X, I'm a bad person. That's how it works. All of you inside your head, if you do something wrong in your life, what do you tell yourself? You tell yourself something negative. And so you try to do right things so you don't feel and think those negative things about yourself. That's how people kind of shape their personality. We are nurtured, our emotions get us nurtured, and our parents then set limits for us, and if they set reasonably appropriate limits and they show us some affection and love, we develop this reasonably balance of, I feel pretty good about myself as long as I follow this set of behaviors. And if I do this, I'm not a good person, so I don't want to do this. That's how it works for every one of you. That's how it worked for me. That's how it works for all of you. You all have thousands and thousands of rules, how to drive, how to do work, how to clean your house, how to make dinner, what foods to eat. All of that's based on, and you don't break those rules, because if you don't do those, you feel like a bad person. You think I'm not a good person, you feel anxious or sad or something like that. I hope this makes sense to you all, because this is really, really important to understand, is that we all have this kind of ratio of good person and bad person. But what's happening with people that develop mental health issues, the ratio gets a little skewed. They get a little bit more bad person-y. And the thing is even if the parents are doing a pretty good job, the kid goes to school. For example, I have dyslexia, so excuse anything miswritten up there. I have dyslexia. School sucked for me. Okay? So when I went to school, when I was in 2nd grade, I got busted for cheating on a spelling test. Yep, I was the guy that wrote all the words on the folder, and they would move his paper over and write a word down and put it back. Well, the teacher noticed the paper, and I got in trouble, and then my parents found out, and then it was all hell broke loose in my house. And so I then had to spend months and months working with my mom at the kitchen table every Sunday and Wednesday to make sure I learned how to spell. Because with dyslexia, it's very, very hard to do. And so, do you think I felt like a very good person? Think I thought, I just have this, but I didn't know I just thought I was what? I didn't know I had dyslexia. I just thought I was what? Dumb. I did. I have a big dumb button. I thought I was dumb, really dumb. And so now I got this. And how do you think I felt when I went to school and I had to do spelling? How do you think I felt? I felt a lot scared. And do you think I felt a little sad because you think I disappointed mom and dad? Absolutely. I wasn't following the rules of life, which is do well in school. Do you think I told everyone that? Do you think I walked in and said, teacher, I'm very sad and scared right now because I feel very dumb because of the way the spelling thing's going about? No, what did I do? I kept my mouth shut, I kept it all inside. And so I developed a negative ratio. I developed more dumbness, more thoughts about dumbness and more anxiety than some kids that didn't have dyslexia. Okay, so that's just one example. It can happen in other ways. I see this all the time. I also am quite short. Can that play a role in how I think about myself? Absolutely. Does that guarantee being a short person that you're going to end up with mental health issues? No. But if you can't perform as well in school as other kids, guess what? You're going to take a little bit of a I'm not good enough hit. Now, the question is how many I'm not good enoughs, dumbs, or I'm not cute enough, fast enough, pretty enough, smart enough, how many of those things can you absorb before you start getting really emotionally unwell and start really not liking yourself? I don't know the answer to that question. But everybody has a ratio of negative emotionality where they feel icky and negative thoughts, but they also need to have a counterbalance where they feel regulated, calm in the body, and think they're okay. And mental health is basically, to some degree, a ratio of that. Now, obviously, as I said earlier, if you were born with autism, there are some genetic things here that are separate than what I'm talking about. But do you think an autistic kid goes through the same process that I'm talking about right now? Yes, they do. Yeah. A kid with autism can get anxious and depressed because they may at some point realize, why don't people like me? That happens all the time. And so kids with autism not only have to deal with the autistic way they process, then they have to deal with the fact that no one likes them. And so you get a double whammy. And oh, wow, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing any of those things. Oh, yeah, it doesn't matter. I can do without it. Is everybody getting this so far? Am I making sense? And I think it's really important for you to internalize this. Now, if you walk up to your child and say, how do you feel about yourself? I have 2 children. I've worked with teenagers my whole life. It's kind of my specialty. Are they going to tell you, yeah, Dad, I feel really, really sad and anxious inside, and I got all these negative thoughts about myself, and, I feel like you're a little too hard on me, and, these friends don't like me, and they make me think this. Is any of that going to come out of their mouth? No, it's in there. It's in there. I know this for a fact. I train students all the time. I'm always training students, trying to teach them what I'm teaching you. And kids will go to them, they'll go in. The kid will actually come to therapy, and the kid will be willingly coming to therapy. Therapists say, "What would you like to talk about today?" And the kid's like, "Nothing." It's like 30% of the counseling sessions that I watch with kids in junior high and high school, they choose to come to counseling, and when they get in counseling, the therapist says, "What would you like to talk about?" They go, "I don't know. Let's play Uno." So a lot of times teenagers, kids, especially youngins as you get down to 7, 8, 9, they don't actually even have the language to describe what I just described to you. As a therapist, it takes weeks, if not sometimes months, to be able to get to the level where a kid becomes aware of what I just taught you. I know it's there. How do I know it's there? Because at the end of the day, before I get to the behavior piece, these are, in my career, these are some of the thought processes that I see in many kids. I talked earlier about, you get a lot of emotionality, and you get the cognitive piece, and so these are some of the hidden things that kids say. These are all things I've heard kids say to me. Actually, I was just talking to I was doing therapy last night with a 16-year-old, and basically they said, "I don't feel like anyone cares for me. I feel very, very unloved." And then they cried. This is really, really sad. But you know how awesome it was that they told me that? Because see, now I can help them. Because I know we now are at the level of they've told me their deep secrets. They've put words to their deep secrets, and now we can start changing those secrets. But these are what's inside kids. I had one kid, so this is a kid I worked with once, 13-year-old. When she was 13, she was 20. She was a 20-year-old person, but when she was 13, her parents were divorced. She just felt like dad did not care about her, and he really didn't do anything to show he cared about her. I think he did love her, but he was too busy here to care about her. And the parents were divorced, and she was really, really anxious inside. She felt like she was completely unloved and worthless. In fact, what she told me is she felt like she was nothing. That's what she said. I just feel like I have no value. I'm nothing. I'm nothing. And I said, I said, tell me a story where that really was pointed out to you. And she goes, well, when I was 13, I came up to my mom, and I had taken stepdad's gun out of the safe, and I was going to shoot myself. So I had the gun, and I was like telling Mom, I'm going to kill myself. And Mom said, what are you doing? Put that away. We've got to go to gymnastics. And so she walked up, took the gun out of her hand, put it back in the safe, and then took her to gymnastics. I mean, like, I hear stories like that. I'm like, what do you think as a child when that's how you're handled? Well, you think you don't matter at all. You have no value. So what does she do? Well, she went to boys, and she went to drugs, and she just basically did anything she could to try to make herself feel good, because at the end of the day, what was inside her was that she had no value at all. And so she looked for quick fixes to make her feel loved. I'll never forget that story. I was like, you'd think Mom would freak out a little bit more, but no, they went to gymnastics. No, wrong way. Wrong way. Nope, I'm going the wrong way, aren't I? Yep. I'm trying. One more, come on. Nope. Okay, whatever. All right, so the third part, I talked about emotionality, I talked about cognition. The last part of the humanness is the behavior. So we think thoughts, we feel feelings, we do things. Everything we do is related to what we think and feel. Everything we do is related to what we think or feel. So more extreme the behavior a kid engages in, the bigger the feelings and the negative thoughts in the brain and in the body. Okay? All behavior, everything you do, to be honest with you, is more influenced by, what do you think? What do you think influences behavior more, thinking or feeling? Feeling. Feeling runs what you do. We are a very cerebral species. Everything's about reading and being very frontal lobe, very cognitive. But truth be told, is our emotions drive almost all of our behavior. We are very much driven. And so one of the things I have to teach everybody is that all behavior has a purpose. You can think it's just crazy. You can be like, oh my God, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. To that human, at that moment, that was what their emotions were driving them to do. Okay? So no matter how, my job, one of my side jobs is to help people make sense of really odd behavioral patterns. But all behavior is for one distinct purpose: to regulate the body, to calm the emotions in the body. That's it. That's it. It's not as tricky as we think it is. And so mental health, the behaviors in mental health, sleeping all day, depression. Why would you sleep all day? It would make no sense. You're not doing school, you're not doing work, you're making no money, you're not hanging out with friends, you're not doing any fun. Why are you sleeping all day? Anybody want to guess at that? Why would a person sleep all day? Because what's the alternative if you wake up? You feel bad all day. You feel exhausted. You feel sad. You feel like no one cares for you. You think no one cares for you. You think no one loves you. And so what you do is you go, back to your room, and you fall asleep. And then you get up, and then you get washed over with the sad and the heavy and the tired, and then you go, whatever, and you fall back asleep. To all of you, it makes no sense. To that human, it works perfectly. Now, you could say, but they're screwing their life up. Do they know that when they're asleep? No, they don't. When they wake up, they'll know it, yes, and then they'll decide they suck some more, feel heavy, tired, and go back to sleep. See, what happens so often is we look at someone's behavior and go, that's stupid, don't do that. And we're not really asking what's going on inside you to cause you to do that. All behavior has a purpose. The primary purpose, to some degree, is regulation of emotion. It's regulation of emotion. And if you have that negative ratio, too much I suck, too much other people suck, and I suck to some degree, you're going to end up feeling very icky inside, and you're going to do behaviors that calm you. You know, like you've all heard about the opiate epidemic, right? Opiates is now the number one mental health killer in the world. Opiates are killing more people than any other mental health issue, opiate addictions. Well, what opiates do? Opiates are a powerful chemical that numbs all physical pain and emotional pain and activates happy. It makes sense, doesn't it, now, why opiates are killing more people and more people are addicted than ever before? Is because it hits all three boxes. You don't feel good about yourself, you're tired all the time, you feel sad, you take a little pill, and now that's gone. Any pain you have is gone, physical pain is gone, and you get a little bit of happy. Of course we have an epidemic of it. It checks all the boxes, if that makes sense. But, not everybody does opiates. Truth be told, I see opiates many times. They're for the people that really get addicted many times have had pretty severe trauma. So the dysregulation in their body, the emotions in their body is usually, and the things they tell themselves are pretty epic. I mean, truth be told, addiction is driven mostly by, I really hate myself. And I feel really icky all the time. There's this whole world. We can treat addiction, but we don't treat mental health. That's kind of made up. You have to work with the human. You can't just work on the behavior at the other side of it. The last piece, the more emotion inside the person, the bigger the behavior. The more the behavior is concerning to you, the more non-prosocial it is, the more emotion is inside that person. Time. Okay. Next. I'm going to skip, but I'm not skipping. I'm going backwards. All right, so now let me get into specific mental health disorders. Okay. So every mental health disorder, all of them, have a thought process, an emotional process, and a behavioral outcomes. Okay. So let's talk about disorders of fear. These are the most common ones. Disorders of fear is the most common one because fear is absolute necessity in humanness. Fear is the ultimate survival emotion. The problem is that fear is, anybody know how you become less fearful of something? What do you think you got to do? Exposure to it. You have to do the scary to not be scared. You have to do the scary to not be scared. So let me tell you a story. So 1994, I was applying for my first real counseling job. I was out of school, I had left my internship, and I had to go to Duck River, Tennessee to do a job interview. This is 1994, so we didn't have cell phones, we had maps. Duck River, Tennessee is in the mountains of Tennessee down 4 or 5 dirt roads, okay? I had to be there at noon. I was 3 hours away. It was a noon interview. I was 4 hours away, so I figured I'd leave an hour early. It was pouring down rain. It was winter, and I got lost. So here I am trying to get to a job interview. I'm wearing a tie, just driving around back roads of Tennessee in a pouring down rainstorm. How do you think I felt? I was screaming. I was hitting the steering wheel. I was so overwhelmed and frustrated. And I have like, I can't look it up. There was no one to call. There was no gas stations. I was just taking left turns down dirt roads in rural Tennessee. Don't do that. But I did make it. I was 15 minutes late, which, how do you think I felt? Terrible. But I think about my childhood. How many times in my life, I'm 52 years old, how many times in life did I have to get where I am in life, do the scary? How many times have I had to do the uncomfortable, the scary thing, talk to someone I didn't want to talk to, call someone I didn't talk to, send an email I didn't want to send, or basically do something that made me uncomfortable? How many times do you think I've had to do that? I bet you it's in the tens of thousands, if not 100,000. My whole life sometimes feels like I just do the scary every single day. I can't tell you how many. Sometimes people ask you, what do you do for a living, John? I have awkward conversations for a living. That's what therapists do. We have awkward conversations for a living. Those awkward is scary. So we have created a culture. I skipped the slide a little bit to talk about electronics. How easy is it for people right now to avoid having to do things? You don't have to grocery shop anymore. That actually makes me really sad. I always felt like, well, at least people have to leave their house to get food. Nope. And so we have so many anxiety disorders right now because it's so easy for what? To not have to do something scary. And so, because the thing is, if you have a lot of anxiety about talking to people, how do you cure that? You talk to people. It's called social phobia. But if you don't talk to people, guess what? People will remain scary. In fact, the more you avoid the scary, the more scary the scary becomes. Anxiety disorders are built by what I call avoidance behaviors, doing something else versus doing the scary. And we've created a whole generation of people where how many things does this save you from having to deal with? How many things? It's like if you're arguing with somebody, when I argued with somebody, we couldn't agree because we couldn't Google it. You just had to be uncomfortable with the fight. Like you can resolve things. It's so much easier, to be honest with you, to be a person in this world than it was when I was growing up. And so what does that mean? Kids have to do less scary. Oh, school's scary. You don't have to go to school. You can what? Do it from your computer screen. It's scary to me, actually. Because truth be told, is what do kids really, besides reading and writing and all the things they learn in high school, what else do kids need to learn how to do? People. I can't tell you how important school is to learning how to people. How to make friends, what you can do and not do to make friends. I see so many kids homeschooled through their entire existence, and then they turn 18, and they're like, I don't want to leave the house. Well, if you haven't left the house in 18 years, what do you think it's going to feel like to leave the house all of a sudden? You know, when my son was 6 years old, I tell this story a lot, we were at Subway. And he wanted a turkey sandwich. And he's this little 6-year-old, Subway with the little glass dome, And he's like, Dad, get me a sandwich. I said, no, you get a sandwich. He goes, no. And he gets little tears in his eyes. It's an adorable little child. He wants a turkey sandwich. And so the guy says, what do you want? I order. And my son Isaiah, he's like, Dad, he pulls my legs. And I'm like, you want a sandwich? And he's like, and he says, I'd like a turkey sandwich. And the guy said, what? And he said, turkey. I said, turkey sandwich for the little one. But guess what he did? He did this scary. Did I support him? Sure. I'm not going to make him stand up and speak up. He's 6. I'm not an ogre. Okay? But what did I need him to do? A little bit of scary. I needed to shove him. Because if you don't shove kids, if you always protect kids from all the bad things and they don't learn to do scary, you make fear grow. But that doesn't mean you're shoving them into the world all the time. Tough up, man up. You're not your rhetoric shouldn't be hurtful and mean and pushy. You have to push into the world while your arm to some degree is metaphorically around them. You have to balance it. There is people in the audience right now who are like, yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to push my kid harder. Yeah, you can do that. But if you don't do it with support, that can end up undermining your relationship with them, and then they will find ways to manipulate out of it. It's not just shove them into the world, it's shove them in the world with support. They need a stable, safe platform to fall back on, because a lot of times when we start doing the scary the first time, guess what? We fail. And if we feel like we fail and that people are going to hate us or our parents aren't going to support us when we tried, that can be problematic also. So it's like this idea of like we have to shove but support. And right now I'm seeing a lot more, well, there's this thing in our culture where we don't want anyone to get their feelings hurt. We don't want anyone to feel bad about anything. It's okay to get dead last. I was on track. I was a terrible runner. Every race I did my entire junior year in high school, I got last. And I'd get a participation ribbon. Do you think I cared? No, I got last. I was clear on where I was. Everybody was done. I was still running. Did I have to learn how to deal with that? Yes, I had to learn how to be last. Was that okay? It is okay. Especially if you have someone that is there on your side that they know loves you. You have to shove. Now, you see this right now. I see the amount of anxiety disorders I'm seeing right now is rampant. Kids are like, I can't do school. And do you think a kid can get so anxious they physically get sick? Yeah, I see this all the time. They're vomiting and they're like, oh, you don't have to go to school. And the kid's like, sweet. And the minute you say they don't have to school, what happens to the anxiety? Gone. Now, if you send them to school, what's going to happen? Anxious, anxious, miserable. They're going to come home, I can't do it, it was awful, Mom. They're going to make you feel so bad. Push them back. That's how you deal with anxiety. It's a balance between nurturance and pushing. Don't enable. Enable the minimum amount needed so the kid can take over. I made it. Depression. Anxiety and depression are best friends. They're best friends. So if you're an avoider and you stop dealing with people and you stop engaging in the world, sooner or later you're hiding in your house, what's going to happen? You're going to get depressed. See, anxiety disengages you. It makes you run from the world. Depression is what happens when you're alone and disconnected. That's how it works. You know, and your kid can say, I'm really depressed. Do you have anyone you feel connected to? The answer is more often going to be no. Because people who are depressed believe that they are worthless, and they feel a lot of heavy, and they feel a lot of sad, and they feel very tired. Depression comes with tired, and that's a really important thing. It's not just sad, it's also tired, and it makes you not want to do. And when you don't do, you will get lonely, and when you get lonely, you're going to start really, that's where you end up seeing a lot of suicidal ideation, self-harm, drug use, things like that. You know, what I see, the most common thing, I call it the cave. When you walk outside the cave, it's bright, it's scary. And so what you do is you retreat inside the cave. In the cave, your house, your room, your computer, your screen, your virtual world is safe, it is regulating, because out there in the world is scary, so you live in your cave. But sooner or later, you look around and go, I live in a cave. And so the only way to get well with depression is to what? Walk back out of the cave. But what's the problem when you walk outside the cave? You're back to scared. And so then what you want to do is you go put the cave, and then you go back in. And I wish it could say once you get a person outside the cave, it's all hunky-dory, but I hate to say it takes a little time. You know, how long does it take? How many scary things do you have to do before you feel less scared of the world? I've been doing presentations now. I've been a public speaker now for 30 years. I still get a little anxious. Never fully goes away, but I'm able to pull it off. Didn't ruin my sleep last night. I slept fine, didn't worry about it. It's taken me a long time. The first time that I did these presentations to people I didn't know, I didn't sleep very well the night before. But over time, it gets better. I mean, is a job interview ever going to be non-threatening? No, never. Do I still worry sometimes when I do therapy about certain people and their responses? Yes. How much of life is having to deal with anxiety? A lot. But if you avoid life and you disconnect from people, depression is lurking and waiting. And all of us have it. And, you know, if you go back to what I was talking about earlier, You know, if a kid has an unhealthy ratio, a person has an unhealthy ratio, they don't feel like people like them or they don't feel very good, when they have to deal with people, they're more likely going to think people don't like them. They're going to interpret that situation. People don't like me. They're going to be more scared, and then they're going to want to hide. And if their parents let them hide, it can exasperate the whole problem. I wish I'm kind of giving you a logic here. I hope you're able to follow it to some degree. But everybody has their own logic. Everybody's got their own twist on what I'm teaching. But everybody has a certain set of emotionality, a certain set of thoughts that generate a certain behavioral pattern, and all the behaviors they do are reinforced because they regulate the body. The last one I want to make sure I hit on or talk about is oppositional behavior, the actor-outers, the ones that get in your face and tell you to F off, the mean ones, the angry ones, the ones that are out there. Okay, this, interesting, is another complex one because this is the kid that doesn't feel very good about themselves. The angry kid actually, to some degree, is depressed. The angry kid is depressed. Here's one of my little quotes: hurt people, hurt people. Hurt people, hurt people. So kids that are angry, if you have children that are angry and they're acting out and they're attacking, that's because they're sad. And their anger is a way to protect them from you seeing they're sad. They want what they want when they want it. Now, there are some variants to that, but in general, when a kid feels really bad about themselves, one of the things they can do is they can start blaming. It's your fault, Mom. It's your fault, Dad. You're the reason my world sucks. It's the school's fault. It's everyone else's fault. Because if it's theirs fault, then those negative things I think about themselves aren't true. And so it works. It's a way to protect you from having to feel icky. But truth be told, if you over-blame and you're over-oppositional or over-attacking, it's probably because you have a big hurt that you haven't dealt with. You have a big set of negative belief systems about self and a lot of sad inside you that you've covered up through layers and layers of oppositional behavior and anger. That's called an externalizer. See, most kids hide in caves, live in the internet now. But every now and then you get a group of kids that they just decide to tell the world to F off, to be honest with you, in their own way. They do whatever they want. And so, I can't tell you if a kid's going to be an internal or an externalizer, but usually boys go to external, girls go to internal, but that's not 100% true at all. I see a lot of girls that are, actually I see more boys now that are internalizing. Girls externalizing is about the same. I see more boys that are internalizing. Last one I want to mention. Self-harm, suicidal ideation. See a lot of this. And what is it? Self-harm is not actually a mental non-suicidal self-injury is a diagnosable condition. But why do you hurt yourself? Well, it's a behavior designed to what? All behaviors designed to regulate the body. So if a kid is cutting, that means they're dysregulated inside. Why are they dysregulated inside? Probably because they have anxiety and depression inside them. They have a lot of fear and a lot of sad and a lot of tired. Or in some cases, you can get so fearful and so sad, you end up being numb and feeling nothing, and then you actually cut to feel. And then you get other kids that end up developing these patterns of suicidal ideation. They're so tired of feeling this way, they then start thinking that if I was just dead, it would be better. Does it work? It does, actually. It's a regulatory, a way of thinking that makes you think, well, if I just died, then I could feel better. I hate saying this, but it is true. Suicide is the solution to feeling icky. It's what kids do to solve the negative emotion in their body. They kill themselves. That's why people kill themselves, because they're so emotionally dysregulated, death is better than how they feel. That's how it works. Self-harm is different than suicide. There are people that self-harm but are not suicidal. But there are people that are, usually they're both. Suicide should never be treated callously. Yes, kids will say, yeah, if I don't get my way, I may kill themselves. That's got to be handled very carefully. But it still needs to be handled. All right, I did an hour. I'm going to talk a little bit more and then we'll go. Questions? No? Wrong way. What's the next? Oh, come on. Healing, connection. Everything that you need to do as a parent or a caregiver is about connecting. It's the foundation. You need to make the child feel cared for, even when they don't show you they need it or they reject you. Connection. So in the world of therapy, there's this book called The Heart and Soul of Change. It's 500 pages long, and it basically says all different therapies are all the same. At the end of the day, the connection between the therapist and the client determines the client's outcomes. That no matter whether you do EMDR or CBT or DBT or family therapy or systemic therapy or I know so many therapies. And what they say is that all of it is irrelevant if the client does not connect with the counselor, which is kind of a duh if you think about it. If you hate your counselor, they're not probably going to be helpful. And so truth be told, that principle in therapy applies to education. If you hate your teacher, you're probably not going to learn from them. It also applies to parenting. Your child at some point needs to feel loved by you or connected with you at some level. If you're the dad, like I could have been, that always wants your child to do better, that's an out of balance relationship. You also need to tell the kid they're just okay the way they are. That doesn't mean you think their behavior is okay, but they're okay. And they need to know that. So if you're a harder parent, you need to soften. If you're an enabler, some of you are enablers where you're always wanting to support them, you also need to shove. So you kind of need to know all of you are one of the other. All of you are one of, you're either shovers or you're huggers. And you gotta do both. And it's helpful if you have a partner parenting with you, because usually one of you is the other, you're usually opposite. Truth be told, and you're like, oh, I was the shover, my wife was the enabler. And we would argue about that. I'm like, come on, Tanya, like, he can't do that shit, you know? Like, and she's like, but, and we'd fight. And you know what? More often than not, I was like, all right, you win, because connection's more important than shoving. Truth be told. But you do need to shove. Every now and then, I'm like, no, Tanya, he's going to have a consequence for this one, or he's going to have to do this one. So it just really depended on the situation. But I always thought, do they need nurturance, or do they need shoving? But if you're going to shove, you have to nurture, and you need to nurture more than you shove, but you have to do both. Does that make sense to you when I simplify it that way? I hope so, because it's really kind of simple, but at the same time, it's very important principles. You know, you have to, what I just explained to you requires you to be intentional. As a parent, you have to think about what you want to do. I've been playing chess lately. I don't know how many of you play chess. But when I play chess really fast, I so suck at chess when I play fast. I get pulverized. It's embarrassing how bad people beat me. But the minute I slow down and I actually look at the pieces and think about, oh, what would they do? Or what would this? I actually play okay. It's the same principle in parenting. All of you parent like you were parented. That's where you learned it. Kids this day and age do need better parenting or different parenting. I don't know if better is the right word. You need to be more intentional, which means you need to slow down and ask yourself, am I enabling? Am I pushing too hard? Am I in the right framework? You're going to have to guess. But if you slow down and you think about it or talk to your partner, if possible, for 10 minutes, you might actually most likely make a better decision. What I call autopilot parenting doesn't always very work. A good story I had was, I grew up, my mom was not a very well human, and she was very, very hard on me. She was always basically yelling at me. And you know, when I'd spill a glass of milk, it was the end of, the night was ruined. In fact, the next day was ruined if I spilled a glass of milk. I would hear about the spilled glass of milk for 3 or 4 days. Ironically, I was just visiting my parents. They're 80. My dad spilled a glass of milk. I heard about it the entire week I was there. I was like, Jesus, Mom, really? It's milk. He's 80. Let it go. Can't do it. So that's how it was. And so one day, my 10-year-old, Isaiah, again, the kid that ordered the sandwich, he left his shoes out in the rain. and they filled with water, and he had to go to school. And he's like, Dad, my shoes are filled with water, and he's got tears in his eyes again. And all I wanted to do was scream at him. I wanted to yell at him. I'm like, what's wrong with you? How irresponsible are you? I just wanted to go off and make him feel bad for having shoes filled with water, because that's how I was raised. And then I kind of wound up. I got, my mom's Jane, and Jane came a part of me, and I was like ready to rage. And then I went, wow, it's gonna suck going to school with those shoes. Put them on. And he's like, really? I'm like, that's all you got. We gotta go. Put the shoes on. So he put the squishy shoes on. He did squish his way out the door. I was very proud of myself because I didn't pull a Jane. Didn't do my mom. But if I had just gone with autopilot, wouldn't been intentional, I would have shamed the heck out of him. And I would have made the ratio, I would have made him feel more worthless than necessary. Did I really need to punish him? Did he really need a dose of shaming? He's wearing wet shoes to school. That sounds crappy. That's called natural consequences. Regulation's a big word. The idea of, when working with kids, shoving them. If you shove them into the world and they do the scary, over time, the scary will become more comfortable. That's how it works. But you have to connect with them. They have to feel safe. If they don't feel safe, shoving them can backfire. Actually, you'll get kids that start lying and manipulating or get oppositional. I have a kid right now, super anxiety kid outside the home. Anxiety, does everything perfectly at school. At home, they're a nightmare. Mom says, do anything, and the kid's like, no, screw you, and slams doors and breaks things, because the kid basically uses anger at home to get out of their way, and their fear keeps them in line at school. So what does mom need to do? Well, she needs to change the way she's handling the child in the house. There's something going on in that dynamic that mom needs to adjust. Because the kid, when mom says no, the kid dysregulates and has learned that if I freak out, somehow I'm going to get what I want. It's going to work for me. I don't know what else. Oh, yeah, I talked about this. At the end of the day, kids are going to act out. Kids need boundaries. I don't want you to hear this, and I hope you don't hear this, that I'm saying, we just got to connect at all costs. There's a point where we have to set boundaries. We have to set no. I said this earlier an hour ago. We are responsible for creating humans, for society. That's what parents do, is we create little beings that can function in society at some sort of level. So we have to set limits. We have to create rules. And to some degree, we have to tell kids that's not okay. And if you do this, your life's going to be a mess. At the same time, we need to do more nurturance than boundary. Then we need to nurture more. It's in a balance between the two. So this is available. You can,
The recording will be available.
Yeah, they're recording me, for good or bad. Hi.
The link will come out tomorrow.
Cool. So there's so much more to say. Oh my gosh. What I just went over is 3 classes, so 135 hours of lecture. You guys got 72 minutes of it. So yeah, if you have questions for me about any of this or anything you'd like me to expand on, I'm happy to do that.
We've got about 5 minutes if anybody has any questions.
Did I really go that long? I'm sorry.
Do you want the microphone?
I might be able to hear you.
At the beginning, you said you're seeing a lot more kids self-diagnosing themselves.
Yeah.
My question is, how accurate are they?
They're terrible. They're terrible. Well, the question is at the end of the day, if someone says, I have an anxiety, or depression is what I hear, I'm going to need to know, what are you doing? I'm going to need to know what your behavioral product is. Like, what are your actions that you're engaging in? Because to me, that's going to tell me whether or not the depression in you, how many of you feel sad and tired occasionally? How many of you feel tired occasionally and don't want to do anything? This is the nature of our society. So I would have to look at their diagnosis. I say, well, what do you think it is? And if I had my child say, I said, where did you get that? And then I would have to evaluate, what are they doing? And the more extreme the behavior, the more I think it's reaching a threshold of concern, if that makes sense. But I remember when I see this still in the addiction world, where a lot of people identify, well, I'm just an addict. I used to see that. Now I'm seeing it, well, I'm just depressed or I'm just anxious. Or one kid the other day is like, I have multiple personality disorder. And I'm like, well, no, you don't, because it doesn't exist anymore. It's called dissociative identity disorder. And they didn't have it, so I was being a little bit, as a teenager, and I was playing with them a little bit as a therapist. I'm like, so you had to have really bad things happen to you to get multiple personality. What happened to you? Well, I was bullied in 8th grade. I'm like, oh, not good enough. And they're like, well, what do you mean? I said, multiple personality disorder is caused by severe trauma, and things that you don't even want me to describe. So, what I would say is I think a lot of kids are using the language, and people are then going, oh, they don't know what to do with it. And I think the best thing to do is look at the behavior and then ask the kid why they think they have it and explore it a little bit. Because I think some kids are just it's a way of trying to make sense of yourself. We all, as I talked about earlier, you used to in the 50s, you just looked around the town and figured out who to be based on your town. Now you can Google, oh, I'm sad and tired. Oh, I must have major depressive disorder. Or maybe you're just having a bad week, or your girlfriend just broke up with you, or something. That makes sense. Other questions? That work? That answer it? Okay. Go ahead.
What is your best advice for helping specifically high school range teenagers who are really resistant to support?
Oh, this is a hard one. If I knew the answer to this question quickly, I would be a millionaire. The problem with oppositional, really, in your face is they've become guarded for a reason. They're walled off for a reason. And to some degree, you have to be, depending on their type of it, I'm pretty good with angry kids. That's my favorite population to work with is angry kids. Why? Because they don't scare me. And I have a tendency to call them out. I'm like, so that's what we're going to do today. So I would say you would not think it was good therapy, but I'm trying to get around resistance and walls. I used to say this to kids a lot, I know I would literally say, are you going to do this? Are we going to do this angry thing? Or are we going to actually get to what's going on? And then they would show me the angry thing. I'm like, oh, look at the angry thing. I just don't get too offended by it. But you got to understand, you're chipping away at something. People think, like the insurance companies are like, oh, you get 8 sessions to fix the depression. I just want to slap them all. They don't get it. I got a client right now, very angry young lady. Lots of trauma, very angry. 8 sessions, I think we finally had something that I call valuable. She got sad. We got through. 8 weeks. And I've been doing this for 31 years. And she was really, really tough to work with. There was a lot of sarcasm and a lot of battling and a lot of playfulness, a lot of laughing. And she got mad at me a couple times. And I would say that was about as fast, 8 hours. And actually, sessions many times went an hour and 10 minutes because I just wasn't getting anywhere in 30. So we just went a little bit longer, and I was looking for hurt. So with angry people, you just need to know it's going to take time. It's going to take some degree of playfulness, some degree of relationships, and some degree, trust me when I tell you, hurt's there. It's there. You will at times go, maybe they really don't care. No, that's not true. They care. I wish, that's a tricky one. It's a skill set, though. It can be learned. I have learned it. There are kids I don't get through to, but I just need more sessions. Other questions?
Thinking about the wider environment, you pointed out the impact of electronics and the information age.
Yes.
It looks like you have some slides in there too, but are there any other aspects of a wider environment?
Yeah. COVID didn't help us.
That could be 4 more hours or more.
Yeah, well, COVID didn't help us. Because COVID, what did I say? These are disorders of emotionality. What emotion did we give everyone during COVID? Fear. We said, you could go outside and die. Which actually was kind of true. And so we just shoved fear into everyone's life all the time. I don't watch the news because I don't need any fear shoved in my body. But I'm assuming Fox, CNN, and all the news stations were always COVID, 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 COVID. Everywhere you went, how many people died this week from COVID? In some ways, maybe it was needed, but in some degrees, it shoved fear in everyone. So yes, we also have created a very uncivil political climate. You know, just watching the news, my parents watch the news 24/7, and just watching the Speaker of the House thing, you know, there's just so much angry rhetoric about it. Does it need to be, can it be controversial? Yes, but does it need to be such angry, distasteful rhetoric? So I think society's becoming a little less civil. I think COVID has made us more scared, and I think electronics has opened access to all sorts of behaviors. So those are my three biggies. If you want to say those are my big social and cultural shifts that have changed the way kids are developing in our society. There's been a pretty big turn with COVID. Hopefully that, I think some degrees that's somewhat self-correcting, but I still think it's playing out. So that's a quick answer. Yeah.
I was just wondering, it seems like there is more identification and more need. Do you see more counselors going to get certified and coming into the profession?
Well, you know, no. There's a need, but the problem is like, I get lots of students. We got application cycle going right now. Everyone thinks it's just about like being nice and they're gonna get better. You know, what I do is very, very complicated in some ways. Understanding people is very, very complicated, and it takes a lot of time. I tell people all the time, oh, this client's a year. This is 52 sessions before you're going to see much. Because some people have been through so many terrible life events, unpackaging it, helping them feel the feelings, learning to find different ways to deal with it. It just takes time. And there's just a lot of bad therapists. They don't know what they're doing. Why? Poorly trained, their own issues are in the way. You know, I firmly believe as a therapist, you can only take a person to places that you've gone. The weller you are, the more well you can help other people be. The less well you are, the harder it is to move people toward wellness. So there's a lot of issues. You know, there's a desire to create more programs and spit more people out, but I get concerned about that because it comes down to spitting people out that don't know what they're doing isn't going to help. There aren't as many therapists as there are people right now that are available. There are some beautiful, masterful therapists, don't get me wrong. I know a lot of really good therapists, but I also hear stories of their programs and I'm like, they're not doing anything. So if I can't train, we actually are trying to hire some faculty to increase the size of our program. Because I got 72 applications for February 1st, we took 12. Partly because the thing is how easy do you think this is to teach? I mean, not only do I have to teach you the entire science of humanness, then I have to spend hours, years upon years teaching you the art of how to engage with people. And so if I have 30 people in a class, guess what? I don't train them very well. Classes have to be small. Not all of them, but some of them do. So there is definitely a desire for more people to want to be a therapist, but there are limits to how many we can train well. And then if a person gets through and they're not trained well, a lot of times the client doesn't know, because how many of you would know what good therapy looks like? If you went to a therapist and the therapist just listened to you and said some things back to you and made you feel special, would you think that's good therapy? You may actually need to be told, hey, I think you're full of shit. That's something I say to clients. Now, obviously, I don't do it session 1 usually, but sooner or later it might come out of my mouth. I called a lady a control freak 2 weeks ago. I apologized first and said, I hate to say this, but you're kind of a control freak. That's what I said. And then her husband went, yeah. So, I mean, I don't know how to answer your question. I think there is a demand more, but I think it's hard to train everyone well. So, yes.
Can I add one tiny thing? Online therapy is becoming a big thing now.
Yeah, it is.
What's your take on that and filling the gap?
I think it can do great. I think 95% of the time it's fine. I think children under 10 is a no-go. Silly. I think kids have to be present with people, in the room with people. I think 10 to 13 is kind of a gray area. I think 13 and beyond, it can be useful. I struggle a little bit at times when you're trying to process pretty intense trauma. You know, the ability to feel the energy from somebody, and please, I'm not this, I know sometimes people are like, oh, what's energy crap? There is something to energy with people. And I think sometimes the teletherapy medium does block some part of the therapeutic process, but I don't think it completely undermines it. And I think it's way more useful than the downside of the barrier that it blocks that some of the connection. So I think it's far more useful, it's awesome in comparison to what we used to do, which was never do it. But there is some clients at times where if I was only teletherapy, if a client has certain issues, I think I would really struggle with making as much progress if I could see them face to face. I mean, to be honest with you, 5 years ago, I would have been like, it's stupid. Now, after I've done enough of it, I'm like, yeah, I think it actually works 95% of the time. I think there's a percentage, though, that something gets lost in that medium. You guys have done Zoom calls. They can be great. But at some point, you're like, yeah, but it's not the same. And there's an element of that true with therapy. So I don't know if that answers it, but best guess. Again, that's not research, that's John's opinion.
Well, thank you, everybody, on everybody's time. A huge thank you to close the payment, right? Please look for more opportunities. We have some more guest speakers, community events coming out of our mental health advisory committee. If you want more information on what we're doing, please reach out, but huge round of applause for Dr. Klem tonight.
Yeah, and if you are looking for some mental health resources, you can email me at my website, at Stout's website. I do have a private practice that I operate and have therapists. So again, so if that is something interested, if you're looking, I also know some good therapists. I know someone in Hudson that's opening a private practice that's very good. So I do know some decent therapists that I could refer people to if you were interested. So anyway, thank you very much. Have a great night.